Have you ever stopped and wondered why some really sharp people in business, I mean, folks like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, say John Brooks's Business Adventures is their absolute favorite business book?
Yeah, it's quite a statement, isn't it?
It really is. And what could possibly link a massive stock market crash, the launch of this car everyone called, well, hideous, and even just a subtle wink from an executive? Seems random.
Well, maybe not so random when you dig into it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our deep dive today is all about pulling out those, timeless bits of wisdom and some genuinely surprising insights from business adventures.
Mm-hmm.
It's this amazing collection of stories, really captivating stuff from like 20th century Wall Street, big industries. And honestly, it's not some dry textbook. It reads like a novel almost.
What's truly fascinating here, and I think this is why it lasts, is how Brooks just cuts through all the noise. Technology changes, markets shift, but he gets right down to something constant. Human nature. It's all about human nature. Despite all the tech advancements, the basic human drivers, greed, ego, panic, irrationality, they're still calling the shots, massively influencing business outcomes.
Right.
And a lot of the big moments in U.S. business history that Brooks covers, well, the ripples from those events are still shaping things today. You can draw direct lines.
So our mission today, for you listening, is basically this. We're going to distill the key lessons. We'll look at market behavior, why some products soar and others crash and burn spectacularly.
Definitely.
We'll get into business ethics, which is always thorny, and also look at how individuals stack up against these giant corporate systems.
Yeah, that individual versus the machine dynamic.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to getting really well informed. And maybe, just maybe, pick up some valuable tips on what not to do out there.
Always useful.
Okay, let's kick things off with maybe one of the most dramatic moments Brooks writes about, the flash crash of 1962.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic.
Imagine this. 3 days of just absolute financial chaos. $20 billion in stock value vanished. Poof.
$20 billion back then was astronomical.
Right. And the scene on May 28th, 1962, that Monday. Wall Street was already feeling pretty down after 6 months of the market sliding.
Yeah.
But then things went completely off the rails.
And what really tipped it over the edge wasn't just, a bad mood. It was a technical problem, a very, very human system problem.
Go on.
The central office, believe it or not, was updating stock prices manually. And on that day, the ticker tape, the system they used, fell behind.
How far behind?
A full 45 minutes. So imagine you're an investor, prices are starting to drop, but the prices you're seeing are 45 minutes old.
Oh, wow. So you assume the real price is way lower.
Exactly. You panic. You think it must be cratering. So everyone rushes to sell based on that fear of what the delayed information implied. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The panic itself drove the prices down further and faster than maybe they would have otherwise. It just perfectly captures J.P. Morgan's famous, very understated quote, "It will fluctuate."
Understatement of the century there.
Right. It wasn't just facts. It was raw emotion, fear amplified by this information lag.
And the recovery from that part's almost weirder, isn't it?
It is bizarre. There was this widespread belief, almost like a superstition among investors, that the Dow Jones index it couldn't possibly fall below 500 points. Like it was a magic number.
Seriously, a magic number?
Pretty much. So as the index got closer and closer to 500, what happened?
Let me guess. Everyone started buying.
A buying panic erupted. Suddenly, everyone, big institutions, small traders, they all jumped in, convinced it had hit rock bottom and would bounce back.
I did it.
In just 3 days, the market recovered everything it had lost in the crash, completely wiped out the losses.
That is just incredible, almost unbelievable.
It really is. And the big takeaway here isn't just, markets are unpredictable. We kind of know that. It's that the unpredictability is so often driven by the collective mood and irrational expectations, as Brooks puts it, especially when clear information is missing.
So the lack of info fueled the panic down, and then a shared irrational belief fueled the panic up.
You nailed it. The absence of real-time data let perception take over. It shows how critical clear communication is, but also how you need patience. You can't make impulsive moves when things are volatile and you don't have the full picture.
Okay, so that's the market's mood swings. But human nature, human error, it doesn't just move markets, right? It makes or breaks actual products too.
Absolutely.
Let's shift gears then to maybe the most famous product failure story ever. The Ford Edsel.
Ah, the Edsel, yes.
Dubbed the world's ugliest car by some, definitely one of history's biggest flops. Cost Ford, something like $250 to $350 million?
A staggering amount of money, especially back then.
So what went wrong? I mean, Ford was huge. They had resources. What were the internal assumptions, the blind spots that led to such a disaster?
Well, that's the key. It wasn't just one thing. It was a cascade of errors, many rooted in internal thinking that just didn't match reality. You can boil it down to maybe three main things.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, they completely misread the market. They did all their planning back in 1955 during a boom.
Right.
Disposable income was up. People wanted bigger, medium-priced cars. Ford's internal data screamed, "Build the Edsel."
That makes sense.
But by the time it actually launched in 1958, the U.S. economy was in a downturn, and tastes had shifted, dramatically. People suddenly wanted smaller, cheaper, more fuel-efficient cars.
So they built a car for a party that was already over.
Pretty much. They were chasing yesterday's market. That was mistake number one.
Okay, what's two?
Number two, unrealistic customer expectations fueled by Ford itself. They spent hundreds of millions on this massive pre-launch marketing blitz.
Hyping it up.
Oh, big time. Promising something revolutionary, the car for the young executive on the way up. Brooks mentions Ford wanted the car's look to instantly signal who was driving it. Status. But when people finally saw it, drove it, they were just underwhelmed. It was, as someone quoted in the book said, just another four-wheeled automobile.
All sizzle, no steak.
Exactly. The gap between the hype and the reality was huge. And damaging.
Okay, so bad timing, overhype. There has to be a third strike.
Oh, yeah. The third strike, maybe the deadliest, was simply poor build quality.
Seriously, after all that investment.
Yep. They obsessed over the psychological research, the image, the marketing, but apparently skimped on the engineering, or at least the quality control. Brooks lists all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Unreliable brakes, acceleration that was jumpy, oil leaks everywhere, paint jobs that chipped if you looked at them wrong, trunks that wouldn't stay shut.
Okay.
Just basic stuff was wrong with it.
So it wasn't just ugly, it was unreliable too.
Right. It couldn't even meet basic expectations, let alone the revolutionary promises. It's a perfect storm of, corporate hubris, maybe an internal echo chamber, ignoring warning signs, and failing to deliver on the fundamentals.
Wow. Okay, so that's a spectacular failure. Let's contrast that. What about an unlikely success? You mentioned Xerox earlier.
Yes, Xerox is a fascinating counterpoint.
They launched their plain paper photocopier in 1959. And you have to remember, back then, copying documents wasn't really a big thing. People were skeptical.
Right, and the machines that did exist used that special, often messy and expensive, coated paper.
Exactly. But Xerox comes along with this plain paper machine, and despite the skepticism, despite a market that barely existed, boom, 6 years later, they're doing $500 million in revenue.
Just phenomenal growth, out of nowhere, really.
It really was.
And what's interesting about early Xerox, as Brooks points out, was this sort of unusual spirit almost. They had this commitment to social responsibility.
How so?
Well, they were donating millions to charities early on. They even funded this big TV campaign supporting the UN, trying to counter public criticism of the organization. That was pretty unique for a big company back then. Their success felt like it was built on something more than just a profit.
That's really interesting.
But, and this is the crucial question Brooks raises implicitly, can that kind of rapid, massive success actually sow the seeds of its own destruction? Can you get too successful, too comfortable,
too complacent? That's a really interesting transition point, actually, because it leads us right into the whole area of corporate ethics, which Brooks covers brilliantly.
Absolutely.
Let's look at a really stark example, the Texas Gulf Sulfur insider trading scandal. This was back in 1959.
A landmark case.
So what happened was insiders, executives, employees, even their families found out the company had discovered this absolutely massive mineral deposit up in Canada. Huge news.
Potentially worth billions.
Right. And what did they do? They started secretly buying up company stock before telling the public. Classic insider trading.
And the way they handled it was almost brazen. As rumors started leaking out, Texas Gulf actually put out a press release downplaying the discovery.
While insiders were still buying.
You got it. They were actively misleading the public while lining their own pockets, sometimes using relatives or shell companies to hide the trades. It just begs the question, right? What is a company's duty when it has information like that?
To its shareholders, to the market.
Exactly. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, eventually stepped in, charged them with fraud and insider trading, and the court's ruling was incredibly important.
How did it say?
It found Texas Gulf guilty, and crucially, it emphasized that the public deserves a reasonable opportunity to react to significant news before insiders can trade on it. It really tightened the rules and set a clear standard for disclosure.
So that case had long-lasting effects, but it wasn't the only ethical mess Brooks uncovered, right? There was GE, too.
Ah, yes, the General Electric price-fixing scandal, late 1950s.
This involved, what, nearly 30 different electronics companies?
29, yeah. They basically colluded, secretly agreed to fix prices on heavy electrical machinery, overcharging customers by up to 25%.
Wow, and what happened when they got caught?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting from an ethics perspective. The middle managers, the ones who actually met in secret hotel rooms to set the prices, they faced fines. Some even went to jail.
Okay, accountability there.
But the high-level executives, they mostly claimed ignorance, said it was all down to communication errors.
Communication errors? How?
They used what Brooks describes as this chilling wink policy. Basically, the official company policy said, don't fix prices. But the unspoken message, the wink, from superiors was, do whatever it takes to hit your profit targets.
So, plausible deniability built right in.
Precisely. Executives could implicitly approve illegal actions without leaving a paper trail. Judge Gainey, who presided over the trial, had this great quote.
What was it?
He said, one would be most naive to believe that these violations of the law are completely unknown to them.
Cuts right through it.
It really does. It showed how unethical behavior could become embedded in a corporate culture and how accountability could just evaporate at the top.
Okay, and let's circle back quickly to Xerox. You mentioned the risk of complacency after their amazing start. Did that actually happen?
Sadly, yes. It seems that initial success and maybe even that focus on social responsibility distracted them a bit.
How so?
They started investing in things kind of far removed from their core business, like sponsoring TV shows. More importantly, they got slow. They failed to aggressively patent all aspects of their core technology.
Ooh, big mistake.
Huge. And they didn't keep pouring money into R&D, into developing the next generation of copiers.
So they opened the door for competitors.
Wide open. Competitors jumped in, reverse engineered the technology, and started churning out cheaper copycat machines. Xerox went from total dominance to facing serious decline, even near failure later on.
Oh, I know.
So you put these stories together, Texas Gulf, GE, Xerox's later struggles, and you see this powerful thread, right?
Yeah, what is it?
It's about the absolute necessity of ethical behavior, transparency, and relentless innovation. Brooks shows us really clearly that even if you're incredibly successful, letting those things slide, whether it's through lying, winking at bad behavior, or just getting lazy, it can lead to a serious, serious fall. It's a lesson you ignore at your peril.
That's really well put. Now, let's shift focus again slightly to explore this tension Brooks highlights between individuals, often eccentric or bold individuals, and the massive systems they operate within.
Right, the individual versus the establishment.
And a great starting point is the story of Piggly Wiggly.
Piggly Wiggly. I love this story.
The world's first self-service supermarket. I mean, think about how revolutionary that was. Shopping carts, price tags on everything. We take it for granted now.
Totally changed how people bought groceries.
And the owner, Clarence Saunders, was this brilliant but definitely eccentric character.
That's putting it mildly.
And he got into this epic battle with Wall Street investors in the 1920s. Yeah. A bear raid, right?
Exactly. So a bear raid is basically when a group of investors conspire to drive a stock's price down. They borrow shares, sell them aggressively, hoping to create panic, and buy the shares back much cheaper later, pocketing the difference.
Nasty stuff.
And they targeted Piggly Wiggly. But Saunders, he wasn't having it. What's fascinating here is his response. Pure defiance.
What did he do?
He went public and announced he was going to corner the stock, buy up almost all the shares himself to force the price up and crush the bears who had bet against him.
That sounds incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. Yeah. He borrowed enormous sums of money and actually managed to buy up something like 98% of all outstanding Piggly Wiggly shares. The price soared.
There he won.
Well, almost. Here's where the system flexed its muscle. The New York Stock Exchange, in a really controversial move, gave the bear raiders extra time and extension to actually deliver the shares they owed.
They changed the rules for him.
Essentially, yes. That extension gave the bears breathing room. And meanwhile, Saunders was drowning in debt from all the shares he'd bought on margin. He was ultimately forced into bankruptcy.
Wow. So the system protected its own, in a way.
That's certainly how Brooks portrays it. It's a cautionary tale about, excessive pride, maybe overreaching financially, and the sheer power imbalance when one individual tries to take on the entire Wall Street establishment. Even a brilliant one can get crushed.
Which leads us right into the whole idea of shareholder power, doesn't it?
It does.
Because, in theory, shareholders own the company. They elect the board, vote on policies. They're supposed to be in charge.
That's the theory.
But Brooks paints a pretty different picture of the reality, at least back then. He talks about how management often just sidelines shareholders, especially small individual ones.
How?
Tactics like holding the annual meetings in really remote, inconvenient locations. Or, and this one's great, just having executives drone on for hours about boring performance metrics until everyone's too tired or intimidated to ask tough questions.
Yeah, the bore them into submission strategy.
Pretty much. Keep them passive.
But it's not always like that. Brooks does give examples of shareholders who did push back, who were active.
Like who?
Well, there's the example of Wilma Sauce. She was a shareholder activist, quite famous in her time. Brooks describes her at an AT&T annual meeting in 1965.
What did she do?
She stood up and directly challenged the board, which was all male, of course demanding they appoint women directors. She was persistent, asked tough questions year after year.
Did it work?
Eventually, yes, it took time, but she made her point and helped pave the way. It really raises the question for you, the listener. What could shareholders achieve if they were consistently more engaged, more informed, less willing to just be passive observers?
That's a great question. Okay, one more story in this section. And this one is actually a win for the individual against the system, specifically around employee rights.
Ah, the Wolgemuth case.
Yes, Donald Wolgemuth. He was a research scientist at B.F. Goodrich back in the 60s, working on their spacesuit program. Pretty high-level stuff.
Right, cutting-edge technology for the space race.
We got a better job offer from a competitor, International Latex. Standard career move, right?
Seems like it.
But Goodrich freaked out. They sued him, basically trying to prevent him from taking the new job.
Why? What was their argument?
They were afraid he'd inevitably leak their trade secrets about spacesuit technology, even though he had signed a confidentiality agreement. They argued just putting him in the competitor's environment was too risky.
So trying to stop him before he did anything wrong just based on fear?
Exactly. But the court delivered a really groundbreaking ruling.
What was the outcome? The court sided with Wolgemuth. They ruled that he couldn't be punished preemptively. You couldn't stop someone from taking a job just because they might be tempted to share secrets later.
Wow, that's huge.
It was. It established a major precedent for employee freedom and mobility, basically saying companies can't just lock down employees' careers based on fear or potential future actions. It affirmed the individual's right to pursue better opportunities.
Okay, so we've covered crashes, cars, ethics, individuals versus systems. Quite a journey through business adventures.
It really covers a lot of ground.
As we start to bring this deep dive together, what really stands out, the core message that keeps coming through from Brooks, is just how human business is.
Absolutely.
Despite all the changes over the decades, technology, globalization, whatever human nature, with all its brilliance, its flaws, its sometimes baffling irrationality, that seems to be the constant force.
That's the heart of it. Brooks shows that underneath the spreadsheets, the stock tickers, the corporate structures, it's always about people, their decisions, their motivations, their mistakes.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture for you listening, it's crucial to see that these stories Brooks tells, these incidents from decades ago, they aren't just historical footnotes.
How so?
They actively shape the landscape we operate in today. The rules of the financial markets, the norms of corporate behavior, the legal precedents around ethics and employee rights, many of them trace back directly to the kinds of events Brooks chronicled.
So understanding this history helps us understand today.
Immensely. Whether you're trying to make sense of market volatility or thinking about why product quality still matters so much, or grappling with ethical leadership, or even just considering your own rights as an employee. These stories offer incredibly deep and, frankly, timeless insights. They show what can go wrong, and sometimes what can go right.
Okay, so building on all that, here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering these really powerful historical moments that Brooks captured, and thinking about their lasting impact, what responsibility do you have?
Interesting question.
As a consumer, choosing where to spend your money, as an employee deciding where to work and how to act, or as an investor allocating capital, how can you actively engage? How can you push for business practices that are more ethical, more transparent, more responsive in the world around you right now?
Because, as Brooks showed with figures like Saunders or Wilma Sauce or even Wolgamuth, individual choices and actions, they really can make a difference. They can shape the future.
Something definitely worth thinking about.